We're a little over a week away from the Erin Blanchfield Maycee Barber Apex Fight Night card, and admittedly, it's a pretty weak card, probably one of the weaker ones we're going to get all year, but after having a week off from the UFC, even a weaker Apex card is better than nothing. So in today's video, I'm going to be diving into my full card predictions, breaking down every single matchup, main card, and the prelims, and then giving you guys my winner pick and how I think they get it done. As always, drop your predictions down below in the comment section. If you enjoy, hit that like button and subscribe. But starting off here with the early prelims, we have Rayanne dos Santos taking on Ardelean. And both these women are actually 0-2 in the UFC. Dos Santos, though, I actually think she's been robbed in both of her fights. Just really tough luck to start off her UFC run here. Could very easily and probably should be 2-0 in the UFC. Before she actually got into the promotion, she was primarily a grappler, but since getting into the UFC, she's kind of really struggled to land her takedowns, only a 12% takedown accuracy, but she's actually been able to kind of hang in pretty well on the feet. She's a former Invicta atomweight champion, so she's very undersized for 115. Atomweight is 105, so it kind of makes sense why having to move up in weight just to get into the UFC, why her wrestling isn't quite as great as it was, pre-UFC. She's 5'2" with a 62-inch reach. On the other side here with Ardelean, she is 9-7 as a pro, so already kind of a sketchy record. She has faced a very weak competition before the UFC. In her last fight before the UFC, her opponent had an 0-3 record. I will say though, even though it's against, probably sketchy competition, she has finished 8 of her 9 wins. In my opinion, when we look at these two women, I just think Dos Santos has kind of proven she's at UFC level. Even though she's 0-2, like I said, I do think she could be 2-0 at this point. Ardelean just has not, and so even though she's finishing people on the regional scene, it's much worse competition. I'm going to side with Rayanne dos Santos here, and I think she gets it done by decision. Now moving over to Mederos taking on Bolaji Oki. Both these guys are 2 fights into their UFC careers. Mederos is 2-0. Oki is 1-1. For Mederos, he is primarily a striker, 6 knockout wins, has 0 submission wins on his resume, has also landed 0 takedowns in the UFC and on the Contender Series. He has shot a few times, at least tried to mix it up, but he hasn't actually been able to land them. So expecting him to just, want to keep this standing, just operate on the feet as a striker. He's had 2 pretty competitive UFC fights to start off his career. He had a split decision in his most recent fight against Austin Hubbard, and then he had like a 50-50 fight that was actually a unanimous decision that he won, but it really could have gone either way against Landon Quinones. He's just going to be a tough out. He rallies really well against guys trying to take him down and control him. So far, he has an 85% takedown defense. On the other side here with Oki, he is 9-2 as a pro. He actually lost his pro debut as an MMA fighter, and then he lost his most recent fight. So lost his first and his last fight, won the 9 in between. He's a pretty aggressive fighter. He's going to mix things up, but whether he's striking or grappling, he's going to push a pace. He's going to be aggressive. He has 5 wins by knockout, 1 by submission, 3 by decision. He had got into the UFC off a round 1 knockout on the Contender Series. He had a decision win against Timmy Kawamba, and then his most recent fight was a submission loss to Chris Duncan. I do think this is going to be competitive. I think the odds are close for a reason. I am going to slightly lean towards Mederos here. I think he's the underdog, but I am going to pick him by decision. Then we're going to have Jordan Leavitt taking on Kurt Holobaugh. And for Leavitt here, he's actually been out since November of 2023. Someone who's known as a very strong grappler. 6 of his 11 wins are by submission. And he's kind of just a guy who wants the fight on the ground, whether that's him taking down his opponent or he will also just welcome takedowns if he's able to just, use his jiu-jitsu, grapple off of that. So he's not a great wrestler, only a 25% takedown accuracy, but he just doesn't stuff takedowns because he's fine getting taken down, just getting into those scrambles. He only has a 30% takedown defense. On the other side with Kurt Holobaugh, he has a 2-6 career UFC record that's over 2 different stints. He did go on a really nice run to win the Ultimate Fighter where on the show, he had 3 straight finishes, but since, getting that second contract, he has gone 1-2 since. He is a finisher. He has 7 knockout wins, 10 submission wins, only 4 decision wins, but he's also been consistently out-grappled in the UFC. He was taken down 4 times by Alexander Hernandez, 3 times by Krzyzewski, I think I butchered that name, 3 times by Trey Ogden, twice by Austin Hubbard, even though he did win that fight. So he has been susceptible to getting taken down, only a 39% takedown defense. I do think in this matchup, he's going to have the advantage on the feet. I do think he's a better striker than Jordan Leavitt. That's definitely not Leavitt's strength, but I also just think that Holobaugh's defensive wrestling is very concerning, and Leavitt has the ability where if he can get you down and just get into those grappling exchanges, he can control you and he can threaten with submissions. So I'm going to lean towards Jordan Leavitt. It's just this weird matchup where you have a guy who's a really good grappler, really good offensive jiu-jitsu, able to control you, but he's not great at actually getting the fight there. But he's going up against someone who is just really weak in terms of defending the takedowns. So I'm going to go with Jordan Leavitt. I could see him winning a decision, but I'm going to pick him by submission here. We'll go, I guess, round 2 knockout here for Jordan Leavitt. Then we're going to have another fight that I do think could definitely be a grappling matchup here. We have Oban Elliot taking on Ramiz Brahimaj. It's kind of weird matchmaking. It seems like Elliot's kind of making a run here, 3-0 to start his UFC career. Brahimaj on the other side, 3-3, only on a 1-fight win streak. Both these guys are grapplers. In Elliot's 2 UFC decisions, he has racked up 5 and 8 minutes of control time. For Brahimaj, 10 of his 11 wins are by submission. Funny enough, though, even though I think they are both primarily grapplers, both of them are actually coming off of knockouts on the feet. And for Ramiz, that was his first KO win of his career. For Oban Elliot, I do think he can be a little bit chinny in his 2 knockouts outside the UFC. He was dropped in both of those, or knocked out in both of those. He was also dropped in the UFC by Val Woodburn. I just think in this matchup, even though Ramiz is coming off a KO win, I just don't think he's really going to be testing Oban Elliott's chin here. Throughout Ramiz's career, I think it's pretty clear that he's much better as the hammer than the nail, where if he's able to go in there, not have a ton of adversity, he can go in, look good, find a finish, but when he's kind of extended in fights where they're very competitive or maybe he's slightly outmatched, skill for skill, he's really struggled. In his 3 UFC losses, he was finished in one of them, and then he was 30-27 in the other 2. Throughout his career, he has lost all 4 fights that have gone the distance, so he has not yet won a decision. I'm going to lean towards Oban Elliot here. I think he's the better overall fighter. He has the momentum. I could see a finish, but I'm actually going to go with Oban Elliot here by decision. I don't see Elliot going out there and just starching him on the feet. Not saying it's impossible, but I don't think it's super likely. And then on the ground, I think Elliot can, rack up more control time. I think he can out-grapple Ramiz, but I don't know if he's going to go out there and submit him. So Oban Elliot by decision is the pick. Now moving over to Ketlen Vieira taking on Maycee Chiasson. For Vieira, she is coming off a decision loss to Kayla Harrison, a fight she clearly lost, but actually, put up a little bit of a fight. Kayla had some adversity. I think she cut her on the forehead, so it wasn't a terrible showing for Vieira. She's had a solid UFC career, 8-4 in the UFC, pretty heavily going to decision in her wins. She has 1 UFC finish, and it was a submission back in 2017. She does a pretty decent job of blending the striking and the grappling. One thing about kind of women's MMA in general, and I guess especially in like the 135 division, there's not a ton of these women that have real finishing power or just the ability to like consistently hurt people on the feet. And so if you're able to go out there and you're going to have a fairly competitive striking round, but you're able to kind of stamp the round with a minute takedown or like a takedown with a minute left, land some damage, just land a few shots, a lot of times that can stamp rounds for you. So if you're someone who can avoid getting taken down and you can land a few kind of timely takedowns, that can really help you win some of these decisions. And I do think Ketlen Vieira is very good at that. She has a 44% takedown accuracy, which is pretty decent. And then her takedown defense is at 88%. On the other side here with Maycee Chiasson, she has put together back-to-back pretty impressive fights. She is one of these kind of rare fighters at 135 that has some finishing upside. Throughout her UFC career, she has a KO win against Mayra Bueno Silva. That was from a cut, but obviously she inflicted it. She has 2 submission wins against Pani Kianzad. She has KOs against Sarah Morris and Gina Mazzani. She's very physically imposing for the weight class, 5'11", with a 72-inch reach. That is pretty huge for 135. She lands 2.37 takedowns per 15 minutes, so she's capable as a wrestler, and she has landed more takedowns than each of her opponents in her last 5 matchups. So I'm going to lean towards Maycee Chiasson here. I do think there's a chance that Chiasson gets out grappled, but I think when we're looking at the big moments, those are going to skew in favor of Maycee Chiasson, and her wrestling in recent fights has been good enough where I think she can hold up there. I think she's going to be fine on the feet. I'm going to go with Maycee Chiasson by decision. Then unfortunately, it looks like the Andreas Gustafsson Jeremiah Wells fight is off. At the time that I'm recording this, The word is that Jeremiah Wells has pulled out. We'll see on a replacement for Gustafsson. So I'm not going to go through the whole breakdown. In this original matchup, I did pick Gustafsson by round 2 KO. Hopefully he gets another opponent. I think he had to pull out of his initial UFC debut a couple of months ago. So hopefully he does get to stay on this card. But moving over to Allan Nascimento taking on Jafel Filho. I think this is a really fun fight. Nascimento here, 20-6 as a pro, 2-1 in the UFC. Definitely a dangerous submission threat. 15 of his 20 wins are by submission. He's durable, never been finished. The issue here with Nascimento has just been his inactivity. His last fight was in January of 2023. Since that fight, he has pulled out of 3 different matchups. He is someone kind of similar to Jordan Leavitt, who I was talking about. Struggles in the takedown department, but is just someone who wants to get these grappling exchanges going, where he only has a 26% takedown accuracy, but he only also has a 16% takedown defense. So he is fine getting taken down. He is fine operating on his back, trying to scramble to the top, threaten with his ground game. On the other side here with Filho, he is also primarily a grappler, 16-3 as a pro, 10 submission wins, 5 knockouts, 1 decision. He is 2-1 in the UFC, with his only loss coming to Muhammad Mokaev in a fight that he looked really, really good in. I think he had Mokaev in a knee bar that like the vast majority of dudes would have tapped to. Mokaev didn't, ended up submitting him late in the 3rd round. But since that UFC debut, which by the way, just a crazy tough debut, he has back-to-back submission wins in the 1st round. I think sometimes these like grappler versus grappler matchups are very interesting, where you could get like a Movsar Evloev, Aljamain Sterling type of fight where, you know, both guys want to initiate in the grappling and you get a ton of fun scrambles and you just get a really fun grappling match. It's also possible that both guys really respect each other on the ground and they're just willing to go out there and stand. I think, you know, it could go either way here. I think in a grappling fight, I do think I slightly lean towards Filho just because I do think he can rack up more control time as long as he can avoid getting submitted. I think in a pure stand-up fight, I probably prefer Nascimento. I think he's a little bit of the cleaner striker, very aggressive, but Filho does have just like some random power where he could go out there and hurt Nascimento. I'm expecting a competitive fight. I do think Filho is the underdog here, but I am going to pick him to win a very close decision. Now, going up in weight, we have Zach Reese taking on Dusko Todorovic. This is not going to be a super high-level fight, but I do think it's going to be really fun and probably pretty quick. Both these guys are kill or be killed. Zachary Reese, 9 of his 10 fights have ended by finish. Only 1 went to decision, and that was, I think, his first UFC win, maybe second UFC win. For Dusko Todorovic here, 15 of his 17 fights have ended inside the distance. Zach Reese is coming off a pretty recent KO loss on January 18th. I really do not like that quick turnaround, especially going up against someone like Dusko, who does have some power, could really land something big on the feet. I wish he would have taken a little bit longer to kind of recover from that KO loss. He's also only been outside the 1st round 1 time. In his wins, he has 5 KO wins, 2 submissions, and I believe 1 decision. For Dusko here, he is coming off of back-to-back round 1 KO losses. 4 of his 5 losses in the UFC have been round 1 knockouts, so he has been very susceptible to getting finished and getting finished early. In his wins, though, he has finished 11 of the 12. So I would not be surprised if this was a very quick KO on either side, probably getting done in the 1st round. I'm going to lean towards Zachary Reese here. I do think he's a little bit too big of a favorite from like a betting perspective, but I do think he should go in there and get this done. I will say, though, like I mentioned, I am kind of concerned with the quick turnaround. It only takes 1 shot from Dusko, and if your chin's already a little, sketchy coming off that quick loss, that could be an issue for Zach Reese, but I am going to slightly favor him in this matchup. I'll go round 1 knockout for Zach Reese. Then another fight that I think is potentially going to be an interesting striking battle. We have Dustin Jacoby taking on Bruno Lopez. Jacoby's just a really, really solid striker, a very impressive 8-6-1 UFC record, gone up against some very tough opponents. He's coming off a KO win against Vitor Petrino. He's a very active striker for the light heavyweight division, averages 5.33 significant strikes per minute. On the other side here with Bruno Lopez, he's someone who I thought was a super interesting, kind of super fun fighter where he's like a well-rounded guy. He had 6 knockouts, 5 submissions, was going to be aggressive, go out there, kind of push the pace, land big shots. And I thought like kind of his downside was he was a little bit too over-aggressive. He would overextend on the feet, was kind of susceptible to getting, countered, clipped, potentially finished. Then he goes out in his UFC debut, and it's just an absolute clunker. He won the fight, but it was just a super control-heavy decision win. Very, very boring matchup. I think it's interesting because he kind of opted for that wrestling-heavy, control grappling game plan against another striker. The easiest path to victory against Jacoby would be to try to clinch him, take him down, control him. Easier said than done, but that probably is the path that Lopez is going to take, especially when we're looking at his last fight. I think Jacoby's a better striker than who he went up against last time. Now, Jacoby does have a pretty questionable 62% takedown defense, but he has been fighting some high-level guys. I think Jacoby is the much cleaner striker on the feet. I'm going to lean towards Jacoby here, and I think he gets it done early. I'm going Dustin Jacoby round 1 knockout. Then moving over to probably my favorite fight on this card, we have Seok Hun Ko, sorry if I butchered that, going up against Billy Ray Goff. Billy Ray Goff is an absolute dog, an extremely fun fighter, 9-3 pro record, 7 knockout wins, 2 decision wins. He's going to go out there. He's going to push a very, very high pace. He's going to mix in his wrestling. He's durable. He's willing to take a couple of strikes to land a big one. And he has some legit power, works all 3 levels. Had a fight of the night performance against Trey Waters in his most recent matchup. It was a super close fight. It could have gone either way. He didn't get the nod, but in a really tough matchup against Trey Waters, who just has a huge frame for the weight class, I think he had a great showing. He took some damage, but he delivered it, was really kind of bringing the fight to Trey Waters. So Billy Ray Goff will always be tuning in when he's fighting. On the other side here with Ko, this is his UFC debut. He has 11-2 record as a pro, 6 knockout wins, 5 decision wins. I will say his pre-UFC strength of schedule is pretty weak. He has 2 knockouts versus guys with winning records. So the rest of his knockouts, guys who either had 0 fights or had losing records. And then the 2 dudes that had winning records, one was 3-2. I think that was pretty early on in his career, so not crazy. And then the other one was 28, 27, and 6. So like just barely a winning record. And I also don't know how you have 6 draws. That's kind of crazy. So he's just not finishing like real top level comp. He did mix in the grappling on the Contender Series, which is how he got into the UFC. Primarily someone who's going to go out there and headhunt. I am going to lean towards Billy Ray Goff. I like the way he mixes in all 3 targets. I do think he can find a finish here. I think Billy Ray Goff goes out, lands some big shots in round 2, puts the pace on, and I think he ends up finding the finish on the feet in the second round. And then we have arrived at the co-main event, potentially the most interesting fight for a lot of people. We have Mateusz Gamrot taking on Ludovic Klein. I just think this is a really, really interesting matchup. I think these guys kind of go together well stylistically. And I think Gamrot is this interesting fighter where he is very good. He has a few like really solid tools, some solid traits, but I think he's always going to be very live to be in just very competitive fights against pretty much every like top 20, 25-ish lightweight, where he doesn't have these skills to like really pull away and stamp these finishes. So against the highest level dudes, like they're always going to be dogfights against Mateusz Gamrot. He has a 7-3 record in the UFC, super high level cardio. The dude can wrestle for days. He's gone 5 rounds. The cardio's legit. He pushes a relentless wrestling pace, averages 5.25 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he only has a 35% takedown accuracy. So that takedown accuracy is not great, which makes it even more impressive that he's landing over 5 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he's taking down really high-level fighters. 6 takedowns against Arman Tsarukyan, 4 against Jalen Turner, 11 against Rafael dos Anjos, 5 against Dan Hooker, 4 against Beneil Dariush. Now, he's not going out there and controlling these dudes for a ton of time. Some of them he, is, but he's at least getting that initial takedown, and he's mixing things up pretty well. On the feet, he is a little bit chinny. He's been dropped in 4 of his last 6 fights, and it's not including the Dan Hooker fight where he was also hurt at one point in that matchup. And then, like I mentioned, he's just not great at actually controlling dudes once he gets them to the ground, and he's also kind of limited as a submission threat. So a lot of his fights have kind of turned into him getting outstruck, potentially getting clipped on the feet, getting hurt, and then him kind of like winning rounds or just edging out rounds by then wrestling them, turning him getting clipped and dropped into a takedown and, holding on to someone's leg like he was doing against Jalen Turner. We saw Arman Tsarukyan, he got dropped in a round and still somehow managed to win it on the scorecards. RDA got dropped in the first round, was still able to land 11 takedowns and win that fight. So he's someone who's going to go out there, he's going to scrap, he's going to get into these competitive, close matchups. And I don't think that Ludovic Klein is an easy matchup here for Mateusz Gamrot. He's not someone who's going to go out there and be super easily controlled. He has a very solid UFC record, 7-2-1 in the promotion. He has 4 straight wins. He is unbeaten in his last 7, and he had 3 wins in 2024. So he has a lot of momentum heading into this matchup, whereas Mateusz Gamrot, coming off a loss against Dan Hooker. Klein does have kind of a stockier frame for this weight class, only 5'7", but has a 72.5-inch reach. So he's going to be like 3 inches shorter than Gamrot, but actually does have the longer reach. He's a clean striker on the feet. He throws to all 3 levels. Not insanely powerful, but can hurt you. And for someone who's kind of chinny like Mateusz Gamrot, I'm not saying Ludovic Klein's going to go out there and just put him out cold, but I do think there could be moments in this fight where he clips Gamrot, has him rocked a little bit in this matchup, and then has also just had really, really strong takedown defense. 91% takedown defense in the UFC. I'm really tempted to pick Ludovic Klein here. I've kind of gone back and forth. I am expecting a very close, very competitive fight, but this is also a pretty significant step up in competition here for Ludovic Klein. Gamrot is only losing like very close fights to some of the best guys in the world. And it's also tough because just over 2 years ago, Ludovic Klein had a draw against Jai Herbert, and the only reason it was a draw was because Jai Herbert lost a point in the first round for, I believe, a nut shot. So 2 years ago, he's in these very close, very competitive fights with dudes that are not even close to the top 15. Mateusz Gamrot's been fighting the best dudes for a while now. I think Mateusz Gamrot is just going to be a little bit too much. I think he's going to scrap enough to get the takedowns. I think he's going to do fine enough on the feet, and I think he's going to win a close decision. Now, like I laid out, I don't think it would be shocking for Ludovic Klein to win this fight. I think of all the dudes kind of, making their push into the top 15, this probably is one of the worst matchups for Mateusz Gamrot because he's someone who just wants to go up against someone who he can wrestle heavily against and kind of control. Ludovic Klein hasn't really been that guy, but in a close, very competitive matchup, I'm going to pick that guy who has the experience and also has been able to go in there and win some of those very close fights against an Arman Tsarukyan, a Jalen Turner. Even if I don't necessarily agree with the scorecards, he's still been able to get it done. So I'm going to go with Gamrot by decision. And then we have arrived at the main event here, Erin Blanchfield taking on Maycee Barber. I think this is a really interesting matchup. This one was previously booked back in 2021. Didn't happen. We get it here in 2025. Erin Blanchfield was really kind of on a roll prior to fighting Manon Fior. It really looked like she was just making that push to the title. She was 6-0 in the UFC before that fight, lost to Manon, and then picked up a decision win against Rose Namajunas in her last fight. Erin Blanchfield's strengths are definitely her grappling and her cardio. She has 3 wins by submission in the UFC. We look at her fight against Rose Namajunas. She clearly lost the first 2 rounds in that fight. Rose Namajunas, someone very experienced, has gone 5 rounds, has that championship experience. Blanchfield won rounds 3, 4, and 5 on all 3 scorecards. Now, that was a little bit controversial. I think Rose definitely could have gotten the nod, but all 3 judges scored those, rounds 3, 4, 5, shows the cardio, shows the pace she was able to put on Rose, and also the wrestling that she was able to push in those later rounds. Some of the weaknesses we've seen out of Erin Blanchfield: she's kind of struggled to land those takedowns against some of the bigger, more physical opponents. She's not huge for the weight class. She is kind of a stockier build, not super tall. We look at her matchups against Manon Fior and Taila Santos. She combined to go 0 for 17 on takedowns against those 2 opponents. Now, she still won the Taila Santos fight just because she was able to win a very gross, kind of grimy clinch fest against her. For Fior was not having any of it. She wasn't getting clinched. She was just going to pick her apart on the feet, and that's how Fior won that matchup. So she's still kind of raw in the striking. The striking's going to be better if she's able to effectively mix things up and get her grappling going, and she's going to need to do that in this fight. I don't think she can go out and stand for 25 minutes and, win consistently against Maycee Barber. For Maycee Barber here, she is on a 6-fight win streak, but she is coming off a year layoff. Her last fight was on March 9th, 2024 against Ketlen Chookagian. She has dealt with seemingly some pretty serious health issues after that one. I do think in this matchup, she is going to be the more physically imposing woman here. She's an aggressive striker. She's really, really strong in the clinch, can land some big shots there, nasty elbows. The takedown defense is a little bit of an issue. She's only 53% on her takedown defense. She's been taken down in her last 6 fights. She was taken down 5 times by Andrea Lee, someone who's known more as a striker, twice by Amanda Hebos, and then she's also not great off her back. Like, she's not great at scrambling, getting back to the feet. She's not really going to threaten, with her submission game off her back. And so I think it's an interesting matchup. I do kind of want to pick Barber in this matchup. I do think she's going to have some early success. I think if she is able to kind of defend the takedowns, like we saw Tyler Santos and Manon Fior do, I think she's going to have some success, because if the fight takes place like the Tyler Santos one did, where Santos is able to, stuff all the takedowns, Maycee Barber is not going to lose a clinch fest fight. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think if Erin Blanchfield is just going to hold on to her in the clinch, I think Maycee Barber is going to make her pay, and I think she's going to land big shots. But when you have the combination of the questionable takedown defense, the pretty long layoff, and then also just limited experience, or pretty much no experience going 5 rounds, I feel like I have to go with Erin Blanchfield. I will say, if this was a 3-round fight, if this was not a main event, I think I would actually side with Maycee Barber. The fact that this will probably go 5 rounds, and we just saw Blanchfield have success against Rose in round 3, 4, and 5, I have to expect Erin Blanchfield, even though she might have to weather an early storm, I think she could kind of pull away in the later rounds, just like we saw her do recently. So my pick is going to be Erin Blanchfield by decision. I think Barber can make it tough, but I am going to go with Blanchfield here. And that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. Drop your picks down below. Do you agree with my calls? Let me know your thoughts for the Barber-Blanchfield fight, the Gamrot and Ludovic Klein fight. Let me hear it down below. But thank you all again for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.